So let's start by introducing our guest, Mossi Raz, who we're very lucky to have today. Mossi has this sort of bio filled with accomplishments that could take. Oh, Mossi, you're frozen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. Mossi has, to introduce Mossi could take an hour. He has that sort of experience and accomplishments. Mossi was a member of the Knesset with the Meretz Party from 2000 to 2003, and then again from 2017 until 2019. He's also served as the executive director of Peace Now during the organization's height in the 1990s. And outside of this, he served as director of the joint Israeli-Palestinian radio station All for Peace. He served as chairman of the Life and Environment, the largest organization of Israeli environmental groups, as the chairman of Israel's leading disability rights organization, and as a board member of the sustainable transportation organization, Transportation Today and Tomorrow. Mossi has also been an incredible friend and supporter of Extend since the beginning, and he's spoken to hundreds of young American Jews who come on our programming. For those who aren't familiar with Extend programs, we offer education focused on the occupation and human rights to young American Jews who are visiting Israel and the Palestinian territories. So with that introduction, let's get into the conversation. Mossi, so we're talking today about annexation and the Israeli left and what's the state of things. So first of all, let's start with the basics. I hear this word, 80% of the words that people are talking about when they're discussing Israel today is annexation, annexation, annexation. What are we talking about, Mossi, when people say this word? What is annexation?
Great question. Hi, everybody. Good evening here in Israel. Good noon, afternoon, morning. I don't know exactly in America. As you know, Israel occupied the West Bank in 1967. Since 1967, even not one state in the world, including Israel, see the West Bank as part of Israel, meaning the Israeli law has nothing to do with the occupied territories. The defense minister, the army, is in charge of the territories. And for example, a kind of an example that I gave yesterday to my students, I told them, you know, in this place where I live, in Shoam, a small town between Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, or in Tel Aviv, or even in Jerusalem, if the municipality wants to say to build a new road or a new neighborhood, they need the permit of the Interior Ministry. But if a settlement wants to do that, they need the approval of the defense ministry, because everything there is under the army and not under the Israeli law. Now, one can say, okay, so what? But before I answer the question, so what, I want to exclude East Jerusalem. Actually, East Jerusalem was annexed to Israel a few weeks after the Six-Day War in 1967. By the way, it was annexed again in 1980, because sometimes you want to see that you are the landlord, you are the, yes. Anyhow, because East Jerusalem was annexed to Israel, there are differences between East Jerusalem to the rest of the West Bank. One difference is that there is one state in the world that recognized East Jerusalem as part of Israel, and this state is Israel. If I talk about the rest of the occupied territories, even Israel doesn't recognize. Second one, okay, I'm a little bit ironic, but because in a way, partly, US is recognizing, but basically the answer is no. Second, as I said earlier, everything that regarding to the law, the Israeli law is the one to charge in East Jerusalem when we talk about Israeli settlers and when we talk about Palestinian people who live there. Now, I have to say, in East Jerusalem, live around 360,000 Palestinians. The number is not that clear, but of course we talk about hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who live there since 1967, and almost all of them are not citizens of Israel. They are residents of Israel, but they are not citizens of Israel, meaning, for example, they don't have the right to vote for the Knesset. So when one asks, okay, are we going from a democracy to apartheid? I'm saying, no, we are going from a partly democracy to more apartheid than democracy. Yes, because we include more Palestinians under this situation. So this question of annexation did not start today. It started in 1967. Second, and this is why me and many other left-wing peace activists, human rights activists are, I would say, scary from this idea of annexation, is the fact that when you annex, there are certain legislation that can make easier to the government to take Palestinian lands. In East Jerusalem, the majority of the lands were under, actually under no sovereignty, but under Jordanian occupation, that were under Palestinian ownership or Jordanian government ownership, are now part of the Jewish settlements in East Jerusalem, or anyhow are owned by Israelis, owned by Jews, owned by the Israeli government. So it makes confiscation, for example, way easier. The law of custodies, I don't want to elaborate too much about that, but make way easier to the government to take these properties, and this is a problem. On the other hand, we don't know exactly what the government is going to, or the Knesset is going to annex, but when we read the interview with Prime Minister Netanyahu last Friday in Israel, he said that they don't want to annex Palestinians. So, meaning a kind of, Bantu stance. They are not going to give them the rights, and if they don't annex Palestinians, what are they going to do? They are going to annex their lands without annexing them, meaning the house where they build, the community where they live, probably will stay under the same occupation right now, but the places where they work, the places where they have agriculture, the vacant places will be taken. And then settlers can use that, and then the government can use that, and that can create a problem of freedom of movement, like we know from other places in the West Bank. We know, for example, many places in the West Bank, when Israel built the wall in agricultural areas of Palestinians, and then Palestinians who used to work in their lands all over history, or at least decades before, cannot go. Because they don't have the permit, they have the wall. So these are things that make it very difficult. And of course, I know people who say annexation is violation of the international law, but I try to show why it is very important regarding the Palestinians on the ground, not just a kind of a law that is not touching anybody. And I hear people say, if you annex, then actually you declare that you are the owner, and then you're not going to compromise about that in the future. And there is something in that point. Of course, Israel annexed East Jerusalem. It doesn't mean that the international community and peace activists and human rights activists in Israel and in all over the world say, okay, you annexed East Jerusalem, it's going to be part of Jerusalem forever. Yes, we do say that in future agreement, it's going to be part of Palestine, not part of Israel. But it makes easier to the government to market to the Israelis, you know, this is Israel. And not only marketing, the law in Israel says, which is interesting, because actually, according to the Israeli law, the cabinet can declare a war. Not like in the US that you need larger forum, I don't know, I think the Congress, right? In Israel, the cabinet can declare a war, and in certain circumstances, even defense minister and prime minister, meaning two people, can go to war. How many people we need in Israel in order to go to peace? We need 2/3 in the Knesset. 2/3, not a majority. Why? Because they legislated a legislation say that if we want to withdraw even for 1 meter from sovereign Israel, then we have to go to the Knesset to get 2/3 or to go to referendum. There is no referendum in the Israeli law. There was never referendum here. So actually, you need 67% in the parliament in order to achieve peace. By the way, unlike a case like Gaza, that was not under Israeli sovereignty, and then you can have it in a majority. So the fact that if, for example, tomorrow the Knesset annex 10% or 20% of the Jordan Valley or Etzion Block or anything else, it make it way more difficult, not only from a thinking point of view, but on the ground. Then you need 2/3, and to achieve 2/3 to a peace agreement between Israel and Palestine, or give a Palestinian state, it is not easy. I'm not sure that we have a regular majority, not to speak about 2/3. So I try to answer what are my concerns talking about annexation.
So thanks for such a comprehensive answer, and I think that last part is particularly crucial. Let me ask you about, you touched on so many important parts of this. Let me ask you more about the land issue. So if I'm a Palestinian whose land is going to be annexed and I rely on that land, you know, to support my family, what legal rights, like what position am I in? What legal rights do I have after that land is annexed away from me? What recourse do I have, if any?
Basically, the first answer is that you have nothing to worry about. Why? Because if it is only annexation, the land is still yours. Yes? But we know that when you start to annex, then you might use laws. And I talk mainly about 3 things. The first one is the custody law. I think this is the translation. Actually, it was legislated in 1950 in Israel. Actually said refugees, the people who left the state of Israel, their property is not their property anymore. They left to enemy state, so it's not their property anymore. And it is automatically confiscated for the sake of the state. So I don't want to argue about 1950. It was, you know, in the end of the 40s. In the 40s, states in the world, in many wars, killed 100 million people, and there was a war here too. And there were Palestinian refugees, there were Jewish refugees, and those people left. I don't want to argue about that. Then, automatically, actually, this law was used in 1967, because in 1967, when Israel reached East Jerusalem, it was not a problem to Palestinian who used to live in East Jerusalem was there and his property was there. But it was a problem to few Palestinians who say, for example, you know, they were until 1967 under Jordanian occupation. So, for example, a Palestinian who live in Jerusalem but left for a college in Amman, Jordan. So he was in an enemy state when Israel came to the place. According to the law, his property is belonging to the state now. It's very few cases, but it is easier to do that. And actually, it is possible to do that right now. And it was not possible until now in the West Bank, that is not Jerusalem. Second, in Israel, it is easier, it is not easy, but it is easier to confiscate land for what we call in Israel public needs. I know it is way more difficult in US, but public needs might be a road, for example, maybe road to the settlements. Public need might be a military location, for example, or police location. And in this way, your property is in higher risk for confiscation. Third, you have to worry, maybe you have to worry about freedom of movement, because they might tell you, okay, your land is in Israel, but you are in Palestine, and you cannot come here. And you say, but this is my land. Okay, go ask refugees from 48 or 67 if they can come to their lands. So from these three risks, maybe there are a few more that I cannot think right now, but those are three risks that you have. Automatically, nothing will change on the ground, but you have those three risks that, especially the question of freedom of movement, and the fact that they create a separation between you and your property.
Great. Thanks for that. I think that's really important that people are familiar with that, because as you say, so much of the focus has been about the violation of law, and it is a violation of law, but it's also important to understand the particular ways that this will affect people living in the annexed areas. Mossi,
Yes,
I want to ask.
And maybe I just want to remind again, the fact that it makes it way more difficult to an agreement in the future, because it raises the majority that you have to get in the Knesset from regular majority, say even 2-1, yes, to 67% of all members of Knesset. So you need 8 out of 120 to come and vote for it.
And I want to ask you specifically about that. So what is the state of the opposition in Israeli electoral politics to this annexation? We know that Gantz was part of signing this coalition agreement, which includes the annexation. What does the political map look like? Which parties are opposing this?
Very good question. There are two clear there are two parties who actually clearly oppose the annexation. It's the United List and Meretz. And we mobilized this Saturday night people to Amin Square in Tel Aviv to protest. Labour Party traditionally opposed annexation, but they speak differently now. 2 out of the 3 representatives of Labour Party are ministers in the cabinet. Maybe I can guess that maybe they will oppose in the government, in the decision in the cabinet, but will support in the Knesset or just. So we cannot build anything on Labour Party. And of course, we have the peace organizations in Israel that are part of this rally on Saturday night. We are weaker than ever. The fact that Labour Party is not with us. I'm not even sure about Yesh Atid, the main opposition party. I don't clearly know what they are going to do. They are now in a kind of an atmosphere that they oppose everything that the government is doing, so that would be great. Kahol Lavan, part of the government, maybe will protest in the government, but they will support. Now, I want to tell you about a survey, public opinion survey, that was published today, done by the Democracy Institute in Israel, actually saying that the majority of Israelis support annexation if US support. So there is no majority among Israelis to annexation without the support of the US. This is why, by the way, you are very important, maybe in this point, more important than us. Because it's not only Netanyahu who waits to listen if he gets the green light from DC, it's the Israeli public. Of course, there are, I think, about a third of the Israelis that support anyway. They don't need the Americans in order to support, but they are minority. And then comes a kind of a third that oppose anyway. They are going to oppose anyway. But there is a third to say, actually, if US support, great, we will go for it. And the very clear majority among voters of right-wing parties, among Likud, Haredim parties, and of course Israel Beitenu of Lieberman. So it's even reflecting the Knesset. There is a clear, large majority to annexation if there is a green light from DC. And this is why you, the listeners, and the people who see me right now, watch me right now, are more important than me, because rallying Rabin Square is great, but the address is in Washington.
Let me ask you something about that, Mossi. Do you think it matters, not just what the Trump administration is saying, but what the Biden campaign is saying in terms of maybe a reversal of US policy? As in, does that segment of the Israeli population that you're talking about, do they care not just what Trump says today, but what an imminent new presidential administration in the US might say in November or afterward?
I'm not sure that I know the answer, but one of the main differences between the majority of the Jewry in US to the majority of the Jews in Israel, it is the way they see the American politics. As you know, unfortunately, Israelis, of course, not all of them, but in large majority, are very supportive to President Trump, unlike the majority of the American Jewry. And Biden, you know, we, the opposition, leftists, say that Biden has said that, and Biden had said that, most of the Israelis don't care. Of course, if he to be elected president of US, then it's going to change. Yes? Then they say, okay, listen to what he says. But right now for them is, I don't have any survey, but I can guess that they even cannot, the majority even don't know the name of Mr. Biden. So it's or the name of the Democratic candidate for presidency. For them, US right now is President Trump, and they are very happy about that. Now, of course, Netanyahu is way more sophisticated. Netanyahu is very sophisticated. He's not a prime minister of Israel 14 years because he is stupid. He's 14 years prime minister of Israel because he is very smart. And if, for my guess, if he think on July that Biden is going to be president, and in this case, it's going to be a problem for him, he will not annex. But I said two things. First, he thinks that Biden is going to be president. And I see the public opinions poll about US, and I think you have the same problem that we have here, that also, always we're more the liberals, and we are so optimistic, and in the elections, things are different. And second, Mr. Biden is saying right now what he's saying. The main question for Netanyahu is going to be, say that I annex, and Biden is going to be the president. What is he going to do? To say, okay, you have to cancel the annexation? If not, if he just say, okay, I don't happy with that, let's go on, then Netanyahu is going to go on. And in the end of the day, Netanyahu is very cynical. He is smart, and he thinks about Netanyahu. Netanyahu is going to annex if he thinks that he's going to help Mr. Netanyahu. And we have to show him that maybe it is not that good for Mr. Netanyahu. Right now, he is enjoying very much to talk about that, because he see that right-wing voters are happy about that. And instead of criticizing him that he actually excluded the right-wing party from the government, they are happy about what he's saying. He see that Kahol Lavan and Labour are in a problem. It just makes them more confused and more divided. So he's happy about that. It's very good for him to talk about annexation. I hope that it will not be good for him to annex.
So let me just pause to say, if folks on the call have questions, you can send them in either through the chat or the Q&A, and I will ask Mossi. So on this topic, before we move on, what do you think would be the most effective thing that the Biden campaign could be saying right now to create incentives for Netanyahu not to annex?
Wow. I'm not sure that I have a clear answer. You know, many leftists like me would tell you sanctions. I don't think it's going to happen, and I don't think that it is productive. I don't think it's going to help. You know, in the end of the day, I remember that Mr. Biden is representing millions of Americans, or tens of millions of Americans, and he wants to be the president of United States of America, the most important state in the world, the most important country in the world, and he has to do what is good for him in order to be elected. And I think for us, it's good that he will be elected, not only if we ask about Israel and Palestine. If we think about liberal spirit, if we think about democracy in the world, and so on. So it's not only about that. So I fully understand that he is now in election campaign, a strange one with this coronavirus, but he is now in an election campaign that he has to do what is good for him. And I don't really know, you know, in the states that are in a kind of even, what is going to change. If this question is on the agenda of the voters in this situation that, you know, in all over the world, but in US too, people lost their jobs, people lost income, people lost hope. I'm not sure that the average American voter care that much about this Palestinian in the Jordan Valley that is going to lose his field. I think that what can be productive for us is to say we hug Israel in 67 borders until the last meter of the border, but we have nothing to do with Israel in the occupied territories. And we are going to make a clear differentiation to strengthen our relation with Israel while to stop all our relations with the occupied, with the settlers and the settlements in the occupied territories. By the way, there is one thing that might be very important to Israelis that I think can be very popular here in Israel. Again, you ask about Israel, is the question of the visa. If one tell, okay, if he say, okay, Israelis can come to US like they go to Europe without visa, but one condition is, I don't know, free settlement activity, cancel any counts of annexation, so on, then it might be very productive towards Israelis.
We're getting, before I ask the question, someone is saying that it might not be the biggest priority for the election overall, but this is a big question with the American Jewish world and the American Jewish voter. And I think we certainly saw that in the primaries, a big difference in approaches. We've got someone asking here about what are your thoughts about how annexation will affect the PA? Is there a threat of the PA actually collapsing, which is something we seem to be hearing all the time? It's always, the PA is always about to collapse. What are your thoughts on that? And will that then lead to a very different sort of occupation?
You know, if I have to guess, I hope the Palestinian Authority will not collapse. But the Palestinian Authority is very weak. The Palestinian Authority is very weak because two main things. One of them is directly fault of Israel, which is the fact that they cannot deliver. You know, we are 27 years after Oslo Accords. They cannot deliver. There is no Palestinian state. There is no freedom of movement. And Palestinians got nothing. And they are weak and becoming weaker and weaker every day. And the second is a more Palestinian fault, I mean, authority fault. You know, when the same regime is for decades, then people want to replace this regime or the same party. Rule. In Israel, we had Mapai, the Labour Party actually ruled 29 years, and then people sent them home. Because when after 29 years, you become a little bit corrupted, a little bit tired, a little bit thinking about yourself. And now actually the Fatah, since the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, 27 years, are leading. So the reaction is in a way the same. So the Palestinian Authority is weak, and of course it's going to make the Palestinian Authority weaker. And there is a risk to the sustainability of the Palestinian Authority. To tell you that this is the end of the Palestinian Authority, I believe, hope, and guess that the answer is no. But you know, it's very hard to know when regime collapsed. Nobody could predict when the Soviet Union will collapse, or DDR, or other, or Mubarak, or other regimes, and the risk is there.
All right. Mossi, we're getting a number of great questions coming in from the audience. Let me ask you this one. Someone is asking about, you listed the two parties which are most opposing annexation as being the Joint List and Meretz. Someone is asking, what's the relationship, what's the working relationship between those parties, and what does that relationship look like?
Working relations are pretty good. As I said earlier, we are going to mobilize a protest this Saturday night, Saturday evening, together in Rabin Square with peace organizations. There is another support, of course, in the Knesset. We always cooperate. Mr. Ahmad Tibi, one of the leaders of the United List, was a candidate to the Speaker of the Knesset, and the two representatives of Meretz supported him. Okay, we knew that he was a candidate, but with no chance to be elected, but we supported him. So there is cooperation. I hope to better cooperation, but it's okay. I would say it's 90% and what I can expect. It's not bad, but we are very weak. Meretz and the United List. The United List are stronger than ever, right? And they doing great work in representing the Palestinian minority in Israel, but they have very, very low support among Jewish voters, higher than ever, but still very, very low, say 0.5% or something like that, even a little bit less. And Meretz is weaker than ever. So, if we could trust in the past that Labor will oppose annexation, this is not the situation anymore.
Let me ask you on a related topic, very closely related topic. Last year, you were involved in a very unique run for Meretz leadership, where you were running with MK Isawi Frisch, and you were saying that Meretz should be led by a Jewish Israeli and a Palestinian citizen of Israel. Can you tell us a little bit about that thinking and that idea for what the left might look like with more cooperation?
Yes, I think in the last decade, I'm saying that again and again. What is left, at least for me? Left is fighting for justice, is fighting against injustice. If you talk about justice, it is justice to everybody. Justice to the LGBT, it is justice to women, it is justice to the disabled, whoever, for all the, of course, social gaps and everything. The main injustice in the state of Israel is the differences, the discrimination, and the separation between Jewish and Palestinian citizens of the state. The main injustice, by the way, between the river and the sea is the occupation. So, for my opinion, when we talk about left party, it has to do with all these issues, mainly with the question of the Palestinian minority and the occupation, and then, of course, women, LGBT, and whatever. It is very difficult to do that. Politics is something that is very much related to nationality. I mean, you see in UK Scottish and Irish parties, you see in Spain Basque and Catalan parties, and in Germany a party of Danish speakers, and in Italy party of German speakers. So of course, it is very convenient to Palestinians to vote to Palestinians, and for the Jewish citizens to vote for Jews. But it's something that we must break. We must go together. And we had this opportunity a year ago. We thought that maybe we should run together. It was not clearly that this is allowed. In Germany, the Green Party and the Linke Party, the left-wing party and the Green Party, both of them have a constitution that they have two chairpersons, a woman and a man. And we said we want to build on the same model, Maybe in the future it has to be a woman and a man, and one of them Palestinian, one of them Jewish. Because in the end of the day, the leadership is reflecting everything. Views, tradition, agenda. I wrote an article a few months ago calling for a Jewish Arabic party. What is for me Jewish Arab party? First, it has to be a kind of a parity in the list. 50% or close to 50% Jews and Arabs. This is extremely important. A kind of a party like that will act automatically, for my opinion, differently than all the parties together. Because right now, okay, we have Meretz, kind of, I would say, about 90% of Meretz voters are Jews, 10% Palestinians, more or less on. By the way, we wanted to do that exactly a year ago, like you said, and in the elections, last time that Meretz ran alone on April 2019, we got to 23% of our votes from the Palestinians. So it was way better, but still we had a representation of 1 out of 4, 25%. It was not 50%. And on the other hand, say Hadash or the United List, there are 14 Palestinians and 1 Jewish citizen. And if you check about voters, the proportion is even higher to the Palestinian side. And this reflects everything you do. I mean, Meretz convened in Tel Aviv because this is the center for the Jewish citizens of Israel. The United List, Hadash, they convene sometimes in Haifa, in Natzeret, in Kfar Kasem, places that are a kind of a center for the Palestinian citizens of Israel. Meretz convene in, usually in Sunday or Thursday. United List usually convene on Saturday. Even in this, when Meretz convene, we speak Hebrew. When they meet, they speak Arabic. What is the agenda of Meretz? Things like, okay, we deal with occupation with the Palestinian minority, but if you talk about the agenda of most of members of Knesset of Meretz, okay, it's the situation of women in the army. This is a Jewish agenda. This has nothing to do with the Palestinians. Public transportation on Saturday. This is Jewish agenda, nothing to do with the Palestinians, and many other things like that. I know a little bit exaggerate in order to present my message. And if you look about the joint list, what is there? What are they are busy with? Problems of Palestinian authorities. This is a real problem, but this is a Palestinian agenda. Violence in the Palestinian communities, real problem, but the Palestinian agenda. So what I'm doing is not don't do that and don't do that. I'm saying we must do that and that. We must deal with problems of Jewish citizens and Palestinian citizens right now. We don't really do that. I mean, we have the joint list that they basically deal with the problems of the Palestinian citizens of Israel, and they have more problems. And we have Meretz that basically deals with problems of Jewish citizens of Israel.
I think, Mossi, one of the reasons this is such a provocative and interesting idea is that, you know, as you're saying, oftentimes the left is asking, what will it take for Palestinian citizens of Israel to vote for Meretz? And then we're saying, what will it take for Jewish left-wing voters to support the joint list? But you're saying, no, let's start over. Let's build a party that from the beginning is equal Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinian citizens of Israel. And then let's have a coalition where we balance our mutual concerns around the issues that are most important to us. And I think that's a really provocative and imaginative idea. We're getting other questions. Someone is asking, or actually I'm going to ask one thing first before we move on to it. So those are some of the issues where people don't have things in common. For this party that you're thinking about, what would be the core issues that people do have in common? What would be the main things that you would have a shared vision around?
I think that the shared vision, the most important thing is equality. We're all equal. And it starts with this. I think that if we start with this, everybody can feel that he is part of that. It has to be very inclusive. If you want to have it inclusive, you have to have, if we talk about the first 10 people in the list, you need 5 Arabs and 5 Jews, you need 5 women and 5 men. This is how people can feel that they are there. But this is, for my opinion, extremely important. And you have to share everything that I've said before. When you talk about equality, it cannot be only about the Palestinian minority. It has to be about women too. It has to be about LGBT. And I tell it to my Palestinian friends. There is a lot of improvement among Palestinian representatives in the Knesset in those questions, but it is not enough. It is not enough. They had to deal with LGBT, with the rights, exactly like we deal with the rights of the Palestinian citizens. It's the same. And some of the representatives of the United List are fully understand that, and they are there. But we are not there yet. I mean, I never saw even one Palestinian representative of the Joint List attending gay parade. Even not in Tel Aviv, that it's so easy. I did see Sawi Frej from Meretz. It is not easy for him too, I think, but he's doing that again and again. I did see, of course, the Jewish representatives of the Joint List. So we must understand that this is the same thing. If you talk about equality, it's for all. You cannot say equality for Palestinians, but not for LGBT. Or, I'm not saying that they say that, but you have not only to say that, you have to express. I'm not saying that all the United Lists have to come to every gay parade, no, but they have to be represented from time to time, yes. In the votes of the Knesset, the situation is better. In the last years, none of them vote against rights of LGBT, none of them, even of the Islamic movement. But few of them found a way not to vote for it. And it's still not good enough. So I am talking about that in order to show that equality is for everything. It's not that the LGBT is the main problem. Actually, most of LGBT Jews in Israel are, I will not say in good situation. Okay, yes, they still unfortunately cannot get married and many other things that we go again and again to protest. We have to understand that all the questions of equality is the same. We have to share this vision and understanding, and of course, ending the occupation. And I want to say something that is a little bit, I would say, unacceptable by many people. In my views, I'm social democrat. For my opinion, it should not be a condition to people to be in such a party. I want in this party all the people who support equality. And like in the Joint List, there are many people that are not social democrats. And like we had in Meretz in the past, when Meretz was stronger, we have to understand that there are things that are extremely important and there are things that are very important. And right now, we have to say very important is we can deal with that. I will not say later, but in half power. That half of us are going to work on that, yes, but not all of us.
Thanks for laying out that vision, Mossi. We've got time for maybe one more question coming in, and we've got one participant who's asking two interrelated questions. Question number one, if annexation does happen, do you see the Zionist left as being willing to be flexible on their vision of a Jewish state to include some sort of binational vision? That's question number two. And question number one, do you see standing together, Omdi and Biad, as having a role to play in parliamentary politics?
For the first question, in a way, I think the left wing in Israel is divided in this question. Part of the left wing in Israel is actually, I will take as an example, a member of Knesset Yair Golan, who was the deputy to the chief of staff. He's against the occupation. And his main issue, he says, okay, we cannot annex because we want to be a Jewish and democratic state. And so I see when he opposed occupation, when he opposed annexation, he opposed because he wants the state of Israel to be Jewish. And if you define the state as Jewish and democratic, I think that you can have a kind of a problem with this meaning of bination. The second part or the leftist part of the left fight against annexation. Actually, why do I have to say? You asked me at the beginning why I'm against annexation. I tell you why. Because it is not fair. Because it is unjustified. Because it violates the law and it violates human rights and it violates rights of Palestinians. I don't think I mentioned the question of Jewish and democratic, and I don't think that this is a question. By the way, it's not that anybody is going to give millions of Palestinians to vote in Israel. Even those hundreds of thousands in Jerusalem cannot vote. So it's not when I think about the state of Israel, I think about a state that it is the state of the Jewish people and all its citizens, a democratic state. And this is different. I don't have to, this is a state that all the citizens are equal. By the way, I don't think that there is a democracy that is not of all its citizens. A democracy is a place where all the citizens has the same share in the democracy. You cannot say you're Arab, so you can vote, but this democracy is Jewish. I cannot understand that. Yes, this is a place every Jew can or wants can come. Yes, it is an outcome of the UN resolution in November 29, 1947, to create two states in Israel or in Palestine, Jewish state, this is what they say, and Arabic state. I asked, where is the Arabic state? And when you come from this point, then you can understand why me and Yair Golan are not saying in the same eyes a future party. He says, and I fully understand him because this is the way the left talked until today. It's not that I'm saying anything bad about him. He says, we need a new party. We had to fight against the occupation. We are patriots, okay? I don't have a problem with that. And we need in our party 20% Palestinians, a quota. I'm not there. I'm saying we have to, left is something that we have to be together, 50%, 50% at the beginning. And the left, I have to understand that, okay, maybe part of my meetings are going to be for Qasim and Natsir. And I will not convene when they have a holiday. And they will not convene in Shabbat. And so this is something a little bit different. So for your question, I don't see the state as binational states. I see it as a state of all its citizens, but this is a kind of a shelter. This is the state of the Jewish people. And I think more and more people in the left are looking at that like me. Now, when can come the question of binational state? If one tell you, I'm going to annex all the West Bank, this is not on the table. This is not on the table. Why? Netanyahu told him. He even doesn't want to annex a village with few thousand Palestinians, and they don't dare to think about annexing million Palestinians. But if it happens, I think the problem is not in my side. I'll tell you. Why do I support two-state solution? I support two-state solution because I go again to my first value, equality. I think that Palestinians are equal to Israelis. I think that Palestinians in the occupied territories are equal to Israelis, whatever they are, Jews and Palestinians. So I must solve this problem of equality. If we have two-state solution, it's very clear. You have your state, I have my state. You have to deal. I mean, nobody would claim in US that you have to solve all the problems of the citizens in Mexico. Okay, you have to be peaceful for them. You have to accept refugees. You have to accept, I don't know, foreign workers, asylum seekers. But you don't have to solve. You don't have to pay a pension for the Mexicans. The same if you have two states. If you have one state, it might be very nice. But then I have one question that I cannot, for my opinion, that I cannot really solve. And this is the question of the right of return. Now, according to international law, there is no right of return. If you go back to Cyprus, the court, the European Court for Human Rights decided there is no right for return to the Turks to the Greek part and to the Greek to the Turkish part. But here is different. Why is it different? Because I am Zionist. My father came here 90 years, my grandfather came here 90 years ago because he had the right to return after 1900 years. So how can I claim that a Palestinian who was deported in 48 or 67 cannot return? I don't claim. I think that they have the right to return. Now, if we talk about two-state solution, I'm saying, okay, Jews have the right to return to Israel. Palestinians have the right to return to Palestine. And we are going to give a kind of proportional return to Palestinians to Israel. If I have one state, then Palestinians are going to say, we want the right of return. And Jews will not agree because they say, okay, now we are 50%. If you come, Palestinian refugees come back, we're going to be 20 or 30%. So how can you solve this problem? If I talk to my Palestinian friends that most of them still support two-state solution, but minority support one state, and they tell me one person, one vote, everybody is equal. I say, okay, I'm for it. Do you think that a state, any state in the world, can decide about migration policy? Of course, the answer is yes. Now, If there is a Jewish majority, they accept only Jewish newcomers. If they have Palestinian majority, they will say, okay, all the Palestinians have the right of return, and it will not work. So then my Palestinian friends say, no, one person, one vote, but everybody has the right of return. I don't think that it can work in one state. I think it can work in two states, and this is why I'm supporting two states. So it is not that I'm opposing binational states. If we could solve this question, and I can remind you the history that until actually 1948, large parts of the Zionist left supported binational state. It is not something that is contradicting Zionism, not at all. It is part of Zionism, but if you cannot solve minimal questions like that, I don't see how we can. The second question is about Omdim Beyachad. I am not standing together. I am not objective to talk about standing together because I'm part of the leadership of standing together. I think this is a very important movement, who is actually implementing on the ground better than what I tried to describe what a party should do, but it is not a party, it is a movement. We need a party that look like standing together. This is exactly what we need, with young leadership, with men and women, Palestinians and Jews, busy in the same activity that standing together is doing. Right now, I think standing together is a movement. The mission is not to be a party. And by the way,
Mossi, I can't hear you. I lost your sound there. I'm not sure if others can hear you.
Sam?
Now I can hear you again. Are you there? Can you
Yeah,
hear
yeah,
me?
I made a mistake, sorry.
Okay, no, it's fine, it's fine. Okay, now I can hear you.
The legislation in Israel is very strict that movements or organization cannot support a party. So even if I say together that, if I say now that standing together is a way to be a party, is a beginning of violation of the law. So I would not say that. A party should be a party. And of course, the model should be standing together.
Right. Mossi, thanks for laying out such a vision of what a different, more progressive party might look like on the left that includes both Jewish Israelis and Palestinian citizens of Israel. And thanks for such nuanced answers on annexation and the future of the left and all of these important topics. I think we'll leave it there. Thanks to everyone who joined. I'll just say that for those who want to continue learning about the impact of annexation on Palestinian communities, Extend will be hosting another event with activists from Combatants for Peace, several of whom live in the Jordan Valley that will be annexed. That's next week. If you signed up for this, you'll receive an email with that information. And I hope all of you continue to engage and to learn. And as Mossi said, our voices are very important as so much of how this plays out depends on US policy.
Thank you for listening to me. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And next time in Jerusalem.
Next time in Jerusalem. Thanks for joining us, Mossi.